Remember the story about the hare and the tortoise? Well, in today's competitive business environment, it's the tortoise that often beats the hare, mainly because hares tend to get complacent. That, of course, is the beginning of the end. Hello and welcome to Lessons in Excellence. If speed is the essence of action, slowness is death. This is the new moral of the markets, and the story of David slaying Goliath is repeated often, like that Goliath of a company, IPCL, discovered.
Indian Petrochemicals Limited was a virtual monopoly for over 2 decades from the 1960s. Its 3 plants met half the country's plastic and textile input demand. The rest was met by imports. Profits were a way of life. However, in the mid-80s, IPCL met its nemesis, Reliance. Building global capacities with a new plant in Hazira, Reliance muscled out IPCL in the race for market share.
Sumantra, when you look at the Reliance story and how it took on IPCL, you've actually put this whole into what you call the 3 stages of competition. Take us through that.
You know, if you take last 20 years, how have the notions of strategy evolved? 20 years ago, if we went to an MBA class at a strategy course, all of strategy would focus on what we call competitive strategy, competition for products and markets. That was the basis of strategy. Then early 80s came a completely new concept for reasons we'll get in later, which recognized that underneath comparative strategy that is visible to the world lies the company's resources, competencies, which generate that comparative strategy and support it. It is a very different kind of competition. Comparative strategy was competition for products and markets. The whole strategic architecture was a competition for resources, competencies, and that lay underneath. And then we recognize that one step below this competition for resources and capabilities, the strategic architecture lies a competition for vision and dreams.
They need to win markets, they need to win the competition for resources and competencies, and they need to win the competition for dreams.
That's right.
Okay, stage 1, the competition for markets. Now, you seem to feel that Reliance has done a remarkable job in its early years of doing that. How and why?
You know, again, when we take the notion of comparative strategy, we recognize that companies have strategic options. Michael Porter wrote the book Comparative Strategy, which was the fundamental basis for it. You could have different kinds of what he called generic strategies. One is a strategy of differentiation. My products are different from everybody else's. Another could be a strategy of cost leadership. It is not differentiation, but fundamentally low cost. Another could be focus. If you take Reliance, interestingly, it illustrates all the different forms. In textiles, with Vimal, it was essentially a marvelous example of differentiation strategy. Remember only Vimal? With regard to the petrochemical business, however, the basic strategy was one of cost leadership in a commodity market. So actually in the Reliance story, with regard to comparative strategy, you see all the different kinds of generic strategies.
When you look at Reliance, and again, something that you've written about as well, the fact that they almost, when they went and created those capacities, it was almost a reckless expansion of capacities because they created the demand by creating capacity, lowering cost, and then creating the demand.
You know, whenever you are going for cost leadership, one very important element of your strategy is what you call taking away investment initiative from your competitors. How do you get market share? Demand is growing at a steady rate, right? Right now, capacity is here. You know demand will go this way. You put in a lump capacity that is here. Now imagine what it does to your competitors. Either they also have to put in capacity, they can immediately see overcapacity, price war, nobody makes money. They back out. By the time the demand catches up, you have increased your market share. Again, you put up your capacity. So you almost preempt your competitors from being able to compete by preempting them from being able to make the investment.
Or what is it that companies do in this phase if they've taken this strategy to ensure that the risk is controlled and that they are a bit more certain about winning?
They have to create the demand. They have to build the demand. They have to help the customers to create their end customers. And this is exactly what Reliance did. So they helped their wholesalers. They helped the retailers at every stage.
Reliance's success was defined by an aggressive marketing strategy. In 1980, over 20,000 retail outlets across India underlined its phenomenal reach. The result, a turnover of 210 crore rupees in the same year. Guided by the vision of its founder, Dhirubhai Ambani, it believed that it was possible to win the competition for markets.
Dhirubhai Ambani believed in India. He had this firm belief, this is a big country, therefore there is demand. If I don't see the demand, it's because bottlenecks are preventing the demand from surfacing rather than the fact of there being no demand at all. So I don't have to really create demand. What I have to do is eliminate the bottlenecks that is preventing the legitimate demand that must be in this country from coming up.
But, this is Reliance, a very celebrated case study. Give us some other examples, if you could, of this first stage of competition.
An ideal example is Caterpillar Tractor Company. There are very few companies in the world that have dominated their market throughout the history of the company. Caterpillar dominated the earth-moving equipment market right through history. And this was exactly classic Caterpillar strategy. Demand will grow slowly. Caterpillar, ahead of demand, will put in massive capacity. All its erstwhile competitors, International Harvester, Massey Ferguson, all of them got caught exactly the same way as petrochemical companies in India got caught.
Welcome back. Reliance was successful in capturing the textile and petrochem market. However, to be a master in the art of being nothing but the best, it takes more than a neat strategy. It requires rigid and precise implementation.
The ability to mobilize large funds at the lowest cost. That was Reliance's strength. Between 1977 and 93, the company's turnover increased almost 40 times, from 120 crore rupees to 4,000 crore rupees. A core competence that made Reliance a market leader.
Coming now to stage 2, and I think this leads in beautifully into what you described as the stage 2 of competition, which is really the competition for resources and competencies. Now, one of the competencies that you've seen in Reliance is the ability to manage large projects, the ability to manage the environment, the regulatory environment. Is that really a competency?
There were 3 core competencies that allowed Reliance to succeed. And sometimes this issue of managing the environment takes attention away from the other 2, in which I would say they are about as good as anybody else in the world. One of them is the ability to manage large projects. The whole Reliance somewhere got a simple thing in their heads, which is 1 day's delay in commissioning of the project. The cost is so large that very fine-grained optimization of project costs in the project phase is not worth it. So they approached a strategy they call saturation. Saturate the resources, minimize time. Today we say time-based competition. Reliance was an absolutely marvelous practitioner of time-based competition, so project management. Other was the ability to mobilize and manage large-scale finances. We forget the innovation Reliance brought into the Indian capital market in terms of mobilizing resources, but then using it.
Shubhantru, give us some more examples of some more traditional competencies, technologies, brands. How do you leverage those in the second stage?
One of the very early cases I wrote in my teaching career was Canon.
And the Canon story goes back to the time when Xerox was a market leader, carrying its profits forward since 1959, when it produced its first plain paper photocopier machines. Then came Canon. It did not have a brand, distribution, or financial resources to challenge Xerox. However, it believed that small is beautiful. It catered to small business organizations and individuals, making photocopiers accessible to people through its strong dealer network. Since the 1970s, it has lived up to its reputation as the numero uno in the photocopier industry because it made the best use of its core competencies.
From the outside, you saw this marvel of Canon photocopier industry. Okay, Xerox has 96% market share, totally dominates the market, global basis. All the companies, all over the world, seeing Xerox making oodles of money, they all jump in. Big, good companies, 3M, IBM, Kodak. Canon at that time is a tiny little company. Xerox's R&D budget is higher than Canon's total global revenue. That size, right? At that point, and this is where the notion of strategic architecture became so important. With all the theories of competitive strategy that we had, things like barrier to entry, competitive advantage, you say, okay, what does Xerox have? 3,000 patents, 500 of them protecting plain paper copier technology, worldwide manufacturing infrastructure. Talk about brand, which company had a better brand? We never said photocopying, we said Xerox.
The product was the brand.
Product was the brand, all of that.
Like Xerox, IBM was a global leader in office machines technology. Yet, it met with failure when it ventured into the photocopier business and eventually had to sell off to Kodak. And a relatively lesser-known player made it big. What did Canon have that IBM didn't?
If you are an employee at Canon, the first day, no matter which level you join, you are taken through an employee handbook. The first page of the employee happens? The picture said at the bottom, textiles, then it goes up, textile intermediaries, then it goes up, bulk intermediaries, then it goes up, refining, then it goes up, oil exploration. He was working with Shell in Eden. Shell was an integrated oil company doing all of these things, starting a 6-loom little factory in Naroda. The man had in his mind this whole picture that he wanted to build.
So these 3 stages, Sumantra, that we've just discussed, do these necessarily follow a sequence? Can they be
I will say, most
intertwined?
companies lose the competitive battle at the very first stage, which is the competition for dreams. A very large number of managers and owners do not have the capacity to dream. No matter what else they do, they have lost it. But then just the capacity to dream is not good enough. You have to then understand, given that dream, what kind of a strategic architecture do I need? What kind of resources, brands, plants, capital, what kind of competencies, learning capacities, what kind of organizational capability I will need, and a view, how am I going to build it over time, which is dynamic. But then that's the next step. Then you have to leverage what competencies you have in the product market in terms of day by day, week by week. The time frames are very different. The dream may be 25 years. The competency building process may be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. The competitive strategy is every month, every quarter, every year. And the capacity, the real strategic capacity, is to be able to integrate within the body of the organization so that people understand this overall picture. The link between the competitive strategy, the strategic architecture, and the vision, the dream, if you wish, that link needs to be established with the company.
You've also likened this to an iceberg. These 3 stages to an iceberg.
Competitive strategy is what is visible. What you can't see is what lies underneath, the capacity to raise and manage capital. But even below that, at the very base of the iceberg, lies that vision, the courage, more than anything else, the courage to imagine a future. It is very hard to really believe in what exists only in your own mind. And that is what the capacity for dreaming really is. The capacity to believe what only exists in your mind at the beginning, and then to make others believe that.
Now, there's this concept of core competency. There is the concept of what Michael Porter talked about, businesses being products and businesses, your portfolio of products and businesses. Your construction, the construction that we've just discussed, how different is it from that?
It is not different at all. In fact, it is nothing other than, there was this history in strategy. 1980, Michael Porter had written his book. 85, if you went to a class, it would only be competitive strategy. Then came cases like Canon, which he couldn't explain by that. And then C.K. Prahlad, Gary Hamel created the notion of core competencies as a way to understand that phenomena. Sometimes people make a mistake. They say, competitive strategy is old, core competency is new. Not so. Core competency help you understand how the company builds that competitive advantage, the competitive strategy. And then we said, okay, core competence, but what drives the whole engine? And then we understood the role of vision. In this, I don't think there is an iota that is new in terms of our contribution. This is simply a narration of the history of how the strategy field is. It's like layers of an onion that we have been unpeeling collectively in the strategy community over the last 20, 25 years.
The other point is really that managers, I think, it makes life very easy if you just say, I do this and I will get this result. Or I do this and I will get this result. But it's always and. You can't just say that I will just get my core competencies, I'll just get my architecture right, you have to do all these things simultaneously.
What then is the recipe for consistent growth? A perfect harmony between the 3 essentials of value creation, organizational principles, and people's processes. But companies need to create an alignment process that best suit their needs.